Chapter 1. The Surprise That Should Have Been Perfect. Malcolm Briggs shut the final case file on his desk and let out a rare, satisfied breath. For once, a day in court hadn't drained him dry. His client had been acquitted, the judge had praised his preparation, and even opposing counsel had managed a grudging. Hell of a job, Briggs. But the real reason his mood was lighter than usual sat inside the leather messenger bag propped against his chair. 2 first-class airline tickets to Santorini, a reservation for a cliffside suite overlooking the Aegean Sea, a private sunset yacht tour, and a dinner booking at a Michelin-starred restaurant that had a 6-month waiting list. He had pulled strings for weeks to design the perfect anniversary trip. And then, tucked in a small velvet box in his jacket pocket, was the diamond necklace he knew Talia had once admired. Months ago, in a store window she assumed he hadn't noticed. He noticed everything. He grabbed the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and told his paralegal, "Hold my calls. I'm heading out early." She raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "Miracles do happen," Malcolm said with a grin. The elevator ride down from the 12th floor felt unusually long. He kept running through the reveal in his head. He'd walk in, call out her name, pull her into his arms, tell her to pack a bag, and watch her face explode with surprise. Talia loved grand gestures. She always had, and after the grueling weeks he'd spent in trial, surprising her felt like the perfect reset button. He'd even stopped at a boutique shop on the way downtown that morning and bought a bottle of champagne chilled and wrapped in a silver cooler sleeve. It sat in the passenger seat of his black SUV as he pulled out of the parking garage. "God, she's going to flip," Malcolm murmured to himself, smiling. Traffic cooperated for once. By the time he turned into the quiet, tree-lined street where he and Talia had lived for 6 years, he felt a warm satisfaction settling in his chest. He imagined her maybe reading on the couch, or planning dinner, or working on her latest interior design project. She loved rearranging furniture the way some people loved breathing. There was always some new flow she wanted to try. He parked in the driveway and grabbed the champagne, adjusting the cooler sleeve to keep it cold. Then he took a deep breath, picking up the velvet box from his jacket pocket and clicking it open for one last look. The necklace caught the afternoon light, scattering small prisms onto his palm. "Perfect," he whispered, snapping the box shut. He unlocked the front door quietly, partly for effect, partly out of habit. Talia often teased him for entering like a cat burglar instead of a husband. The house was warm, calm. The faint scent of her jasmine diffuser lingered in the air. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Talia," he called lightly, testing the waters of surprise. No answer. He smiled. She was probably upstairs. He imagined her gasping when he walked in. "Malcolm, you're home early." And he'd grin and hold up the champagne. He took 3 steps inside and set the cooler on the console table by the hallway. That was when something nudged at his awareness, something small but wrong. A pair of men's shoes sat by the door. Not his. Dark loafers. Expensive. Polished but worn at the heel. Malcolm's smile thinned. He frowned and leaned down to inspect them. Size? Too big for him. Style? Not anyone he recognized. They weren't Jerome's, weren't his brothers, and certainly weren't a delivery person's. His pulse stayed steady. Years of courtroom pressure had trained him well. But his mind sharpened, narrowing in. He straightened and let his gaze sweep the living room. At first glance, everything looked normal. The gray sectional perfectly aligned. The throw blanket folded neatly. Her novel on the coffee table. But the details began to emerge like stains on a white sheet. A jacket lay over the armchair, a man's jacket. A branded gym bag he didn't recognize sat half open near the staircase. His throat tightened subtly, a barely there constriction. "Talia," he called again, a little louder. No response. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if the air around him had thickened. His eyes dropped to the floor. A trail of clothing led toward the stairs. First a white dress shirt, carelessly tossed. Then a belt. Then Talia's bra, lace, the one he bought her for Valentine's Day. Farther ahead, her jeans lay in a loose heap at the bottom of the first step, like someone had peeled them off in a hurry. For a moment, his vision narrowed into a tunnel. He didn't gasp. He didn't speak. His body simply adjusted, like a machine switching into a different mode. Everything slowed. Malcolm set the champagne down carefully on the console table so it wouldn't topple. He reached into his messenger bag, pulled out the small envelope containing the trip itinerary, and placed it next to the champagne. Then he stood there in the center of his own home, surrounded by the unmistakable evidence of betrayal, breathing in and out with the quiet precision of someone who had spent years mastering emotional containment. She was upstairs, with someone else. The final piece of clothing, a man's undershirt, hung crookedly from the top of the banister like a flag of contempt. Malcolm's jaw flexed once. A tiny, controlled movement. He didn't storm upstairs. He didn't shout. Instead, he reached into the discreet black case by the side table, a place he'd kept his firearm locked since the day he bought the house. He entered the code, lifted the lid, and wrapped his hand around the weight of his .45 pistol. It felt heavy, certain familiar. He checked the magazine, slid it back in with a soft click, and disengaged the safety. There were sounds upstairs now. Not laughter, but movement. Soft thumps against the carpet. A door creaking. His heart didn't race. If anything, it slowed. He took 3 steps back and lowered himself into his old leather recliner, the one that faced the staircase. The leather groaned quietly under his weight. The house fell silent again. Malcolm rested the gun on his thigh, finger off the trigger, eyes steady on the staircase. His breathing was calm, methodical, controlled. He waited, and waited, and waited, silent as stone, still as a verdict being written. The champagne on the console sat unopened. The necklace stayed in his pocket, cold and uncelebrated. The surprise that should have been perfect had become something else entirely. And Malcolm Briggs, husband, attorney, man betrayed, sat in his recliner with a loaded gun, staring up the stairs, waiting for them to finish. Chapter 2, Calm Before the Storm. The laughter floated down from upstairs like smoke, thin, breathless, intimate. The kind of laugh Malcolm hadn't heard from Talia in months, maybe years. He sat motionless in his recliner, the .45 resting on his thigh, his eyes fixed on the staircase. Every sound from above sharpened his senses. The thump of a mattress, the creak of floorboards, the unmistakable rhythm of 2 people moving in a way no spouse should ever hear. He could make out Talia's voice now, muffled but distinct. "Stop, Reed. Someone might hear." The man, Reed, answered with something low and playful, followed by another round of giggles. Malcolm inhaled slowly, the way he did right before cross-examining a hostile witness. Slow in, slow out. He counted each breath. He didn't trust his emotions, so he stayed with logic. Logic was safe. Logic didn't lie. His gaze shifted to the coffee table. A leather wallet lay half open, a few cards half exposed. Next to it, a phone lit up suddenly, buzzing against the wood. VRRT, VRRT, VRRT. The screen brightened, displaying a contact photo of a woman and 2 young kids. Underneath it, home. The buzzing continued. Persistent, urgent. Malcolm leaned forward and set the gun on the table beside him. He reached for the phone, his fingers steady, and swiped to answer before the call could cycle into voicemail. He said nothing. For a beat, silence. Then a woman's voice came through, strained with exhaustion and something deeper, dread. "Reed? Are you there?" "Reed." Malcolm hesitated only a second. "This isn't Reed." A sharp intake of breath. Who? Who is this?" "My name is Malcolm Briggs." Her tone tightened. I don't understand. Why do you have my husband's phone? Is he okay?" Malcolm looked toward the stairs, listening to the distant movement. "He's alive," he said calmly. "That's the most accurate statement I can give you right now." "Is he in danger?" Dana asked. Her voice was trembling but determined, like someone who had repeated this scenario over and over in her mind. "No," Malcolm said. "Not unless he does something very stupid." A long silence. Then a shattered whisper. "He's cheating again, isn't he?" Malcolm didn't answer immediately. From upstairs came another peal of laughter, Talia's this time, and the sound cut through him like wire. The woman on the phone stiffened. "He's with someone, isn't he?" Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. "Yes." Another silence, but this one was heavier. "Not surprised." Not shocked. Confirmed. Dana exhaled shakily. I knew it, I knew it. God. She sounded more tired than devastated, as if she'd spent years climbing the mountain and only just now reached the top to see the truth was uglier than she thought. I told myself this time was different. He promised me. Malcolm's grip on the phone tightened slightly. I'm sorry, he said. I don't want your pity, she replied sharply, then softened. But thank you. She took a few shaky breaths on the line. Malcolm stayed silent, allowing her whatever time she needed. That was something he understood, the pause before a breaking point. After a moment, Dana said, Are you going to hurt him? Malcolm's eyes drifted to the gun beside him. I haven't decided anything yet. Another long inhale from her side. Then, carefully, deliberately. If you're the man whose house he's in, I assume that means he's with your wife. Yes. Dana gave a low, humorless laugh. Of course. That tracks. A pause. I'm so sorry. I really am. Malcolm swallowed, the first visible crack in his composure. Thank you. Another buzz vibrated through the line, a notification, a text, something minor, but Dana ignored it. Her voice steadier now, she said, You don't sound angry. I'm not, Malcolm replied. Not anymore. Then what are you? Malcolm considered the question. He looked toward the stairs again, the sounds above growing softer, slower. Focused. Dana let out a breath. Fair enough. She was quiet again for several beats. Then, in a tone that was no longer fragile, but firm. I'm not calling to beg you to go easy on him. I'm not calling to defend him. I'm done doing that. Malcolm said nothing, waiting. I only have one request, she said. Tell Reed not to come home tonight. Her voice cracked, then recovered. I won't be here when he tries to. Malcolm's jaw set slightly. Are you sure? I've spent years being sure in the wrong direction, she whispered. This is the first thing I've been sure of in a long time. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I'll deliver the message. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. A pause. Then, softer. For picking up. The call ended. Malcolm lowered the phone onto the table beside the gun. He stared at the screen for a long moment. The last missed call notification still glowed brightly. Home, 12 missed calls. He wondered how many times she'd tried before him. How many times she had hoped Reed would pick up and tell her a lie she could tolerate. The laughter upstairs had stopped. Now there were footsteps. 2 sets. Slow, uneven, like people recovering their breath, adjusting their clothes, unaware that the world downstairs had already shifted on its axis. Malcolm leaned back in the recliner. His posture straightened, shoulders rolling back into a perfectly controlled frame. The gun stayed on the table, but his hand rested near it. He heard Talia's voice again, this time clearer. Did you hear something? I thought I heard. Reed's voice followed, playful and out of breath. Relax. Maybe it was the cat. We don't have a cat, Talia said. Then the wind, a soft smack, a laugh, whispered words. Their shadows moved across the landing above. Malcolm's fingers brushed the grip of the gun. Not a fear, not even anger, just certainty, more shuffling. They were coming toward the stairs now. She said something he couldn't make out. Reed replied with something equally indistinct. A final creak of a floorboard. Then the first step. Malcolm's heart did not speed up. It hardened, and as the footsteps grew louder, descending toward the living room where he waited, the stillness inside him grew sharper and colder, settling into place like the final click of a lock. Chapter 3. The Confrontation at the Stairs. The hinges groaned faintly as the bedroom door above opened. Talia's voice drifted down first, light and carefree in a way that stabbed through Malcolm like a needle. I'm telling you, Reed, I swear I heard something downstairs. Reed chuckled. Then your house is haunted. Come here. His voice dropped suggestively. No, seriously, she whispered, though giggling. Just check. I'm not walking downstairs half-naked because you're spooked. Another soft laugh. A kiss. Shuffling. The faint thud of someone grabbing shoes or a shirt. More footsteps. Malcolm didn't move. Didn't breathe loudly. Didn't blink. He simply waited. The shadows on the landing shifted. First, Talia appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair tousled, her face flushed, her blouse barely buttoned. She was leaning playfully into Reed, whispering something in his ear. Then she froze. It happened in slow motion. Her eyes widened. Her mouth parted slightly. Her breath caught on a silent inhale. Reed, still looking at her rather than the stairs, laughed. What? What is it now? He followed her gaze and saw Malcolm, sitting in his recliner, perfectly still, the .45 resting across his thigh, one hand on the armrest, eyes locked on them like a judge waiting for the guilty to plead. Reed's reaction was immediate and primal. He screamed, not loudly, but sharp and startled, and stumbled backward up a step. His bare feet slid on the carpet, and he flung his hands out to steady himself. Jesus Christ! Jesus, what the hell? He sputtered. Talia's hand flew to her chest. Malcolm, wait, please, just... Malcolm raised a single finger to his lips. It wasn't a shushing gesture. It was a command. Silence. Reed didn't obey. Like an idiot, panic took full control, and he spun on his heel, bolting back up the stairs. No, Talia gasped. Reed, don't. Malcolm didn't shout. He didn't warn. He simply lifted the gun, aimed one-handed with the calm of a man used to pressure, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The sound thundered through the house. The bullet slammed into the wall inches from Reed's head, exploding drywall in a burst of white dust. Reed fell backward onto the steps with a choked cry, flailing, his hands covering his head as he tumbled down 2 steps before catching himself on the railing. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! Talia screamed, stumbling down beside him. Reed shook violently. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. I didn't know. Jesus, please sit, Malcolm said. Just one word. But it held the weight of a verdict. They both sat. Reed on the 4th step, Talia on the 5th, her knees pressed together, blouse still undone, hair a mess of guilt and sweat. Talia raised trembling hands. Malcolm, listen to me. Please, it's not what it looks like. He tilted his head slightly. Is that the line you're going with? Her mouth snapped shut. Reed swallowed audibly, staring at Malcolm with the wide, terrified eyes of a cornered animal. Man, look, I don't want any trouble, okay? I swear to God, I didn't know. I thought you weren't home. Malcolm blinked once. Slowly, you didn't know I wasn't home. Reed stared, confused. WH what? Malcolm rested the gun casually against his leg again. That's your defense? That you didn't know if the husband was home, but you still came in and removed your clothing all over my foyer? Talia placed a hand on Reed's shoulder, as if to shield him. Malcolm, please, he didn't force me. It was me too. Just talk to me, please. Malcolm's eyes moved to her. Cold. Sharp. I'm already talking. She flinched. He leaned forward in his recliner, slightly, elbows on his knees. How long? Talia shook her head frantically. It wasn't Malcolm. You're making this into something worse. How long? He repeated. Reed squeezed his eyes shut. Oh, God. Talia pressed her hands to her mouth. Please. Malcolm raised the gun just an inch, not pointing at them, but reminding them. How long? Talia broke first. Her voice cracked. 6 months. Malcolm's jaw tightened. A single muscle jumped at the corner. Reed buried his face in his hands. Malcolm's tone remained eerily calm. 6 months. He repeated it as if confirming case evidence. Half a year. Talia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. You never meant to get caught. Malcolm corrected. Reed looked up desperately. Look, man, listen. This wasn't supposed to. Malcolm cut him off without raising his voice. Shut your mouth. Reed shut it immediately. Malcolm leaned back again, his posture a chilling mix of control and contempt. The gun never wavered. His eyes never left them. Hotel rooms? He asked quietly. Talia nodded, sobbing. Sometimes. Which ones? The Marquette, she said between sobs. And in the Prescott downtown. Business dinners? Malcolm asked next. Talia cried harder. Yes. Reed raised both hands, shaking. Man, I swear. She said you were never home. She said you were always working late. You didn't mean to sleep with a married woman? Malcolm asked, voice clipped. Reed stopped talking. And you? Malcolm said, shifting his attention back to Talia. You also slept with him in his home? Reed's head jerked. No, damn it, Talia, seriously? Malcolm smiled, but there was nothing human in it. I suppose that answers my question. Talia covered her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Malcolm sat perfectly still for several seconds, the gun resting against his knee, his finger along the trigger guard. The house was silent except for Talia's sobbing and Reed's ragged breaths. Finally, Malcolm spoke. 6 months, he said again. Hotels, dinners, in your house. His voice was so calm it was terrifying. You two have been very busy. Reed swallowed hard, nodding shakily. I'm so sorry, man. Please don't shoot me. I'll go. I'll leave. Just let me leave. Malcolm tilted his head. You should have thought about leaving 6 months ago. Reed trembled so violently that the stair railing rattled behind him. Talia reached for Malcolm in a pleading gesture, leaning forward, her voice cracking with desperation. Please, Malcolm, please, just put the gun down. I know you're angry. I know you're hurt. But please, let's just talk. Malcolm held her gaze with a coldness she'd never seen. Oh, he murmured. We're talking. He settled deeper into the recliner, the gun lying calmly across his leg as he watched them trapped on the stairs, half-dressed, terrified, and exposed in every sense. And as their trembling silence filled the space between them, Malcolm asked one final, icy question that made both of them flinch. What else haven't you told me? Chapter 4, a shot, a confession, a lie for protection. Reed's breathing had already turned shallow and panicked long before Malcolm raised the pistol again. Sweat rolled from the man's forehead in fast, trembling beads, collecting at the corners of his jaw like little glass drops of fear. Talia knelt beside him on the living room floor, one arm draped around his bare shoulders as if her touch could shield him from the reality she helped create. Malcolm stood over them, the .45 hanging loose in his hand, but aimed with deliberate intention. His voice was measured, steady, terrifyingly even. Pick up your phone, Reed. Reed shook his head violently. No, Malcolm. Please, man. Please, she doesn't need to know. Dana doesn't. She already knows, Malcolm replied. Now you're going to confirm it, Talia whispered. Malcolm, please don't do this, as if she still had a right to plead for anything. He ignored her entirely. Reed stared at the phone lying on the coffee table, like it was a venomous snake waiting to strike. His hands trembled so fiercely he pressed them against his thighs to stop the shaking. I'm not calling her, he said at last, voice cracking. This has nothing to do with her. Malcolm studied him. This man standing in his living room, half-dressed, sweating, terrified, the same man who'd been laughing upstairs in his wife's arms less than 20 minutes ago. Malcolm felt nothing but a cold, methodical certainty. A prosecutor might call it premeditation. He called it clarity. Wrong answer, Malcolm said. The next second detonated. The gunshot exploded in the confined space of the living room, echoing through the walls in a metallic crack that seemed to split the air itself. Talia screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure hysteria, and Reed collapsed sideways, clutching at his thigh as blood began to darken the fabric of his pants. He didn't fall gracefully. He dropped like his leg had simply vanished beneath him, sprawling against the floor, crying out in a strangled, guttural groan. Oh God, help, Malcolm, please. Malcolm lowered the gun, but didn't holster it. He knelt beside Reed, examining the wound with a detached, clinical calm. It's clean, he said. You'll live. Bullets through the thigh hurt more than you'd think. Reed whimpered, voice catching on every inhale as he rocked back and forth in agony. Talia crawled toward him. Reed, baby, I'm so sorry. Malcolm's eyes flicked to her. Baby, he repeated softly. Interesting choice of words. She froze. Reed sobbed louder. Now, Malcolm continued, you'll call Dana. Reed's answer was a wet, broken plea. I can't, Malcolm. I can't face her. Please, man. Please don't make me. Malcolm stood, picked up Reed's phone from where it had fallen earlier, and pressed it into Reed's trembling hands. You had no trouble sneaking around in hotels while she made dinner at home, he said. You had no trouble smiling in her face, pretending nothing was wrong. Don't grow a conscience now. Reed couldn't hold the phone steady. His hands trembled so violently it nearly slipped from his grasp. "Call her," Malcolm commanded. The authority in Malcolm's voice snapped something inside Reed. He sobbed harder, wiping snot and tears with one shaking hand, and began to dial with the other. But he didn't finish. 2 digits in, his hands went limp. He dropped the phone and curled into himself, crying incoherently. Malcolm looked down at him. He could see the exact instant when Reed's will dissolve entirely. Not courage, fear. Cowardice clung to Reed Marshall like a second skin. "Talia," Malcolm said without looking at her, "move." She backed away quickly, scrambling to put distance between them. Malcolm retrieved the phone from the floor, wiped the screen clean with the hem of his shirt, habit, not necessity, and dialed 3 numbers with slow, unhurried precision. 911. The line clicked. 911. "What's your emergency?" Malcolm's voice came out calm. Too calm. The tone of a man who decided his fate long before the call was made. "I need police and an ambulance," he said. "A man broke into my home. I fire my weapon. He's down. I feared for my life." Talia gasped. "Malcolm, what are you?" He shot her a look, a simple tilt of the head that shut her voice down instantly. The dispatcher continued. "Sir, is the intruder conscious?" "Yes. He's injured but stable." "Where are you right now?" "My living room." "Where's your firearm?" "In my hand." "I'm going to need you to set it down in a safe place before officers arrive." "Of course." Malcolm ended the call only when the dispatcher confirmed help was on the way. He placed the gun on the side table, stepped back, and raised his hands to show he held nothing. Talia watched him in stunned disbelief. "Malcolm, why would you lie like that? Why didn't you just—" "Because," he said, "I know how these situations go. I know what self-defense looks like on paper." The sirens arrived quickly, loud, urgent, growing nearer by the second. The rising wail echoed through the windows and glass, vibrating through the floorboards beneath them. Reed groaned again, clutching his leg in a puddle of sweat and tears. Talia kept looking between the wounded man and her husband, her eyes wild with shock, dread, confusion. "Malcolm, please, when they get here, can we talk? Without all of this? Without the gun? I never wanted—" He didn't answer. He just looked at her, as if examining a stranger. The front door burst open. "Chicago PD. Hands where we can see them." Malcolm lifted his hands immediately. He didn't flinch when several officers rushed in with weapons drawn, nor when 2 of them roughly cuffed his wrists behind his back and pulled him toward the entryway. Talia screamed. No, he didn't do anything, but the officers ignored her. Reed, meanwhile, kept trying to speak between sobs. I didn't break in, it's not—" "Yes, you did," one officer snapped. "Sir, save your statement for the ER." They separated everyone just as protocol demanded. A paramedic knelt beside Reed, beginning to apply pressure and bandage his leg. Another officer guided Talia into the kitchen. A different officer tugged Malcolm toward the patrol car. "Sir," he said, "you discharged a firearm. We're going to need a full statement downtown." Malcolm nodded, face expressionless. "I only have one statement." The officer paused. "And what's that?" Malcolm looked straight ahead, his voice low and unwavering. He broke in. "I feared for my life." Chapter 5, Jail, Realizations, and the First Turning Point. The adrenaline that had fueled Malcolm through the longest night of his life dried up somewhere around 3 a.m., leaving behind an emotional vacuum so hollow it felt like his bones were echoing inside his skin. The Cook County holding cell was cold, perpetually cold, as if the walls themselves hated warmth. The metal bench offered no comfort, just a thin strip of chilled steel beneath his spine as he lay back and stared at the flickering fluorescent light overhead. It buzzed. It flickered. It kept time with his thoughts. This is what betrayal feels like. Not fire, not rage, just emptiness. Other detainees muttered around him, drunks sleeping off their night, a petty thief pacing, someone snoring like a chainsaw in the far corner. Their noises felt distant, muffled, like Malcolm was hearing them from underwater. His hands still smelled faintly of gunpowder. He held them up, studying the creases, the faint tremor he couldn't quite stop. He remembered pressing the trigger. Remembered Reed's scream. Remembered Talia's face, horrified, pale, disbelieving. But not because she feared for Reed, because she feared for herself. She had looked at Malcolm like she didn't recognize him, like he was the intruder. That thought should have stung. It didn't. He sat up slowly, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Exhaustion had settled in the back of his skull like an anchor tied around his thoughts. Across the bars, the overnight officer, a bored, heavy-set man scrolling his phone, glanced at him every few minutes. Malcolm didn't bother making conversation. What was there to say? He knew the system. He'd navigated it for 15 years. But he'd never sat inside it. He felt something tighten in his throat. Not fear, just the weight of what had happened, and the heavier weight of what would come next. His marriage was dead. He hadn't needed DNA tests, explanations, arguments, or therapy. He'd seen it with his own eyes. He'd heard it in the laughter upstairs, the breathlessness, the comfort their bodies shared. He pressed his palms together. He wouldn't break. He refused. Hours passed. Maybe 2. Maybe 5. Time moved strangely here, like it bent around the metal bars. Then footsteps. The officer straightened, glanced down the hallway. "Briggs," he said, "you're being bailed." Malcolm exhaled slowly. Not relief, just acknowledgement. When the officer let him out, Malcolm expected a lawyer. Maybe his sister. Maybe even his father, though the old man would have shown up only to say, "Told you that girl was trouble." But instead, "Damn, Mal," a familiar voice grumbled. "You couldn't just come home like a normal man." Jerome Carter stood at the counter, arms crossed, wearing yesterday's suit and a frustration that couldn't hide the relief in his eyes. Malcolm blinked once. Jerome, his law partner, his closest friend since law school, steady, loyal, stubborn, looked him up and down like he wasn't sure if he should hug him or smack him. "You look like hell," Jerome said. "You look like a man who didn't sleep either." "Didn't. Thanks for that." Despite the situation, Malcolm felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Not a smile, just the ghost of one. The officer removed Malcolm's cuffs. He rubbed his wrists, feeling the sore indentations. Jerome handed him his belongings in a plastic bag: wallet, watch, phone, belt. As they walked outside into the icy morning air, Jerome kept glancing his way. "Well," Jerome said, "you ready for the worst part?" "There's a worst part?" "Oh, buddy, you have no idea." They reached Jerome's car. Malcolm slid into the passenger seat, the leather familiar but feeling foreign after a night in a cell. Jerome started the engine, sighed hard, and said, "Talia's gone." Malcolm didn't flinch. Gone as in, she moved out. Took her clothes, jewelry, personal stuff. Not all of it, but a lot. Guessing she'll send someone for the rest. Malcolm stared ahead at the road, fingers tapping against his knee. She didn't waste time. No, Jerome agreed. She didn't. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the city waking around them, traffic lights blinking, early commuters honking, a bus rumbling by. Every sound felt sharpened, too clear. Jerome cleared his throat. "And there's more." Malcolm didn't look away from the road. "Reed, his wife." Jerome let out a low, impressed whistle. "Dana's been waiting for a slip-up. She served him divorce papers this morning." That made Malcolm pause, not outwardly, but somewhere deep in his chest where the numbness had settled. Dana, the woman he'd spoken to on Reed's buzzing phone. The woman who simply said, "Tell him not to come home." "What else?" Malcolm asked. Jerome hesitated. "That was never a good sign." "Talk to me." "Mal, I'm your partner and your friend. So I'm going to say this straight." Jerome turned at a light, jaw tightening. "You're out. You're not a suspect in a homicide, no. But a firearm discharge? A bullet in another man's thigh? Even with your self-defense claim, the department doesn't love the optics." Malcolm nodded slowly. "I expected that." Jerome finally shot him a look, half stern, half sympathetic. "I know you, man. I know you don't lose control. Not like this. So tell me the truth. Did you intend to kill him?" Malcolm met his gaze evenly. "No." Jerome studied him another beat, then nodded. "Good." Another stretch of silence. Tension hung heavy but steady, like whether the two men had long learned to walk through together. Jerome spoke first. "So what now? You planning to go home? Get some sleep? Maybe a therapist?" Maybe, I don't know, Bree. Malcolm turned his head slightly, the sunrise catching in his tired eyes. No, then what? Malcolm watched a jogger sprint past them, watched a coffee vendor roll out his morning cart, watched life continue like his didn't just implode. Finally, he said, "Rage is useless." Jerome snorted. "That's so." "Yes." Malcolm leaned back in his seat, voice steady. "But strategy is everything." Jerome let out a breath, half laugh, half concern. "That's the Malcolm I know." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, letting the car's warmth settle on his face. For the first time in 12 hours, something inside him shifted. Not forgiveness, not healing, but direction. The first turning point. Because betrayal might shatter a weaker man. But Malcolm Briggs wasn't a weak man, and he would not be broken. Chapter 6, Building the Case to Destroy Reed. Malcolm didn't go home right away. Home was no longer home. Instead, he and Jerome sat in the conference room of their law office. Glass walls, cold city skyline, and a silence heavy enough to feel solid. It was Saturday morning, the sun barely pushing through the clouds. The cleaning crew hadn't arrived yet, so the whole floor felt deserted. Perfect for what Malcolm had planned. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched before him. He wasn't even sure why he poured it. Habit, probably. His hands were steady now, the tremor gone. The numbness had settled into something sharper, more defined. Something he could use. Jerome dropped a thick manila folder onto the table. "You sure you don't want to talk to Talia first?" he asked carefully. Malcolm didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about." Jerome pulled out a chair and sank into it. "At least closure. Malcolm interrupted, finally raising his eyes. "She made her choice before I even walked in the door yesterday. 6 months of choices." Jerome lifted his hands in surrender. "All right, so we focus on Reed." "We focus," Malcolm repeated, voice low, calm. "And we don't stop." He flipped open the manila folder. Inside were screenshots of emails, conference schedules, corporate non-disclosure forms, and Reed's employment summary. Jerome leaned forward. "I called Cormark's HR director," Jerome said. "Pretended I needed a verification for a civil case. He didn't suspect a thing." Malcolm's eyes swept the paperwork. "This only confirms he works there. I need more." A knock on the glass door made both men lift their heads. Dana stood there. She looked tired, but not fragile. More like a storm that had finally decided to break open. Her brown hair was pulled into a messy bun, her eyes red from lack of sleep, and her coat was still dusted with melting snow. Malcolm gestured for her to enter. "Thank you for coming," he said. Dana stepped inside, clutching a thick accordion-file folder to her chest like it was armor. "I didn't sleep," she said bluntly. "I've been waiting years for this. Years. You think I'm going to sit at home and miss this opportunity?" She dropped the folder on the table beside Jerome's. It hit with a weight that spoke louder than words. Jerome blinked. "Please tell me that's what it looks like." "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," Dana said, pulling out a chair. "Reed thinks he's clever. He thinks I'm stupid. He thinks he's untouchable." She leaned forward. "He isn't." Malcolm opened the folder. Inside were printed text messages, screenshots of dating app profiles, hotel receipts, credit card bills, emails between Reed and multiple women, and a small notebook with dates, times, and short summaries handwritten in neat cursive. Malcolm lifted the notebook. "You've documented everything." "Everything I couldn't prove yet," Dana said. "Just in case. Women always need more evidence than men to be believed. I learned that early." Jerome let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Dana." She shrugged. "He underestimated me. That was his first mistake." "What was his second?" Malcolm asked. "Falling in love with the sound of his own lies," Dana replied. "Reed can't help himself. Every affair he's had, every woman he manipulated, every coworker he harassed, he leaves breadcrumbs everywhere. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He's not." Malcolm set the notebook down and nodded once. "Thank you. This will help us build a timeline. But we still need more." Dana smiled, a cold, chilling smile that reminded Malcolm of someone walking away from a burning building without looking back. "Oh, don't worry. There's more." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. These are the names of 3 women who filed harassment complaints against him, all silenced by the company. Jerome straightened. Hold on, harassment complaints? Actual formal filings? Dana nodded. Cormac buried them. Pay them off. All through quiet settlements. Malcolm flipped through the documents, scanning quickly. The names were redacted on the official forms, but Dana had written them on sticky notes. 3 complaints, all within the last 4 years, Malcolm murmured, and all mysteriously resolved with non-disclosure agreements. Jerome whistled again. Cormac's going to have a bad week. Malcolm's eyes hardened. Good. Dana exhaled shakily, sitting back. I kept telling myself I'd confront him, that I'd leave. But I was scared. Not of Reed, never of him. I was scared of starting over. Her voice wavered. But when you answered that phone call last night, that was the moment I realized I wasn't scared anymore. Malcolm met her eyes. We're going to end this. Cleanly. Legally. Permanently. She nodded. Tell me what you need. Malcolm pulled a legal pad toward him, clicked a pen, and began writing. First, he said, we need Reed's employment contract. Jerome can get the template from corporate filings, but we need the signed version. Dana opened her purse again. Already ahead of you. She handed over a binder clip of scanned PDFs. Malcolm flipped through page after page, salary tables, performance metrics, bonus structure, then he found it. Paragraph 14. Professional conduct and morality clause. Any behavior deemed unethical, immoral, or damaging to the company's reputation constitutes grounds for immediate termination without severance. Malcolm felt a slow, controlled satisfaction settle into his bones. This, he said, tapping the page, is how we end him. Jerome leaned over his shoulder and let out a low laugh. Oh, they're done. Cormac won't protect a liability. Not with this clause. Dana's voice sharpened. They protected him before. Not this time, Malcolm said. Not when the evidence is this extensive. Not when public exposure would cripple them. Jerome nodded. Companies don't care about morality. They care about PR. Malcolm gathered the piles of evidence, organizing them into categories. Harassment complaints, affairs, financial misconduct, contract violations, timeline of behavior. He created a second stack. Supporting exhibits, witness names, potential leverage points, cross-references to corporate policies. Dana watched silently. But Malcolm saw the tremble in her hands as she clutched her coffee cup. You okay? He asked. She paused. I'm angry, and relieved, and terrified. Mostly angry, though. Malcolm nodded. Good. Anger keeps you alert. Controlled anger wins cases. Jerome cracked his knuckles. So what's the plan? Malcolm finished arranging the documents, then sat back in his chair. Cormac Industries has spent years burying Reed's behavior, he said. They won't want this going public. They'll choose to sacrifice him to save their own skins. Jerome nodded slowly. And Talia? Malcolm's expression didn't change. She'll face the prenup, and she'll walk away with nothing. Dana exhaled. And Reed? Malcolm folded his hands. Now we build the case that destroys him. Chapter 7. The Corporate Reckoning. Cormac Industries headquarters loomed over the Chicago skyline like a monolith of glass and ambition. On Monday morning, its lobby buzzed with the usual corporate efficiency. Sleek suits sweeping past security stations, heels clacking across polished floors, the smell of expensive coffee drifting through the air. None of them knew a quiet war was about to begin upstairs. Malcolm, Jerome, and Dana walked through the revolving doors like a 3-person strike team. Malcolm wore a charcoal suit, crisp enough to cut glass. Jerome adjusted his tie, eyes sharp and scanning. Dana walked between them, her posture stiff at first, but iron solid beneath the surface. Last chance to back out, Malcolm said quietly. Dana shook her head. No, I've backed out of too much already. They stepped into the elevator. As the floors ticked upward, Dana's hands tightened at her sides. Jerome gave her a small, reassuring nod. You're doing the right thing, he said. She exhaled shakily. It feels strange, like I'm walking into a battlefield. You're not, Malcolm replied. You're walking into justice. The elevator chimed. Executive floor, Cormac Corporate Administration. The receptionist greeted them politely, unaware that the three visitors carried enough evidence to sink the company's golden boy and possibly the company itself. "We have a meeting with Mr. Sterling," Malcolm said. The receptionist, a young woman with polished nails and forced warmth, scanned her calendar. "Of course. He's expecting you. Conference room A. Expecting them. Good." That meant the CEO had already sensed this wasn't a courtesy visit. They walked down a long hallway lined with framed photos, product launches, charity events, smiling executives shaking hands with city leaders. A timeline of a company desperate to look clean. Conference room A was large, cold, and sterile. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the skyline, but the blinds were half closed as though someone didn't want too much light revealing the truth. At the far end sat Robert Sterling, CEO of Cormark Industries, a man in his late 50s with a tidy salt and pepper beard and the kind of posture that belonged to a man used to commanding rooms. He didn't stand. He didn't greet them. He simply folded his hands and watched them enter. "Mr. Briggs," Sterling said, "to what do I owe this unexpected meeting?" Malcolm set a heavy black binder and two thick manila folders on the table. When they hit the surface, Sterling finally blinked. Jerome spoke first. "Thank you for making time. We won't be long." Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly. "I assume this is about Reed Marshall. I heard there was an incident." Dana nearly scoffed, but Malcolm gently placed a hand on the table, grounding the moment. This meeting had to be controlled. "It's about far more than an incident," Malcolm said. "We're here to discuss Cormark's history of concealing Reed's misconduct." Sterling's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure what you mean." Malcolm opened the binder, and the truth spilled out. He slid a set of documents toward the CEO, copies of sexual harassment complaints, time-stamped and signed, along with the non-disclosure agreements used to silence them. Sterling didn't touch them. Dana spoke, voice steady. "I know about the settlements. I know the company buried the complaints. And I know Reed didn't stop." Her voice didn't shake. If anything, it grew stronger with each word. Sterling turned to her. "Mrs. Marshall, this is a private matter between—" "No," Malcolm cut in. "It's not private anymore. Not when your employee violated his contract. Not when your company covered for him. And not when the evidence is this overwhelming." He pushed forward the second folder, screenshots, hotel receipts, emails, and a detailed timeline of Reed's affairs and harassment. Jerome leaned forward. "As you can see, your employee has been a PR nightmare waiting to happen." And Cormark helped him dig the hole. Sterling's face went pale. His eyes moved rapidly from document to document, jaw clenching tighter. Malcolm slid one final page across the table. "And this is the most important. Reed signed employment contract. Specifically, the morality clause highlighted in yellow. Clause 14. Grounds for immediate termination without severance if the employee engages in behavior that damages the company's reputation." Sterling finally touched a page, lifting it slowly as if it might burn him. "This could ruin us," he whispered. "No," Malcolm corrected, leaning forward with calm precision. "Covering it up could ruin you. Doing the right thing now will save you." Jerome nodded. "We're giving you an opportunity to handle this quietly, efficiently, legally." Sterling massaged his temples. "What exactly are you demanding?" Dana's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Malcolm clasped his hands. "We want the following," he said. He counted each point on his fingers. "First, Reed Marshall is terminated immediately. No severance, no benefits, no corporate protection." Sterling swallowed. "That's non-negotiable, I assume." "Correct." "Second, Cormark issues formal apologies to the women Reed harassed. Not buried, not whispered, public." Sterling's composure cracked a little. "Public apologies could trigger more lawsuits." "That's where item 3 comes in," Malcolm replied. "Full cooperation with any investigations, internal or external." "And 4?" Sterling asked. Jerome opened a folder marked settlement package. "A 7-figure payout," he said, "to compensate the victims whose complaints were buried. Confidential, but substantial. And mandatory." Sterling let out a slow, painful breath. "A 7-figure payout. You're asking me to sign away a chunk of our annual discretionary fund." "Yes," Malcolm said simply. Because it's the correct thing to do. Silence fell. Heavy, tense, suffocating. Sterling looked between them. Malcolm's cold certainty, Jerome's legal precision, Dana's righteous fury. How long have you been preparing this? The CEO asked quietly. Malcolm answered without hesitation. 48 hours. Sterling stared, speechless. That's when Malcolm knew they had him. They had the company. They had the leverage. Finally, Sterling stood, walked to the window, and exhaled sharply enough to fog the glass. If this goes public, he said, Cormark takes a catastrophic hit. It won't go public, Malcolm replied. If you agree. Sterling turned around slowly. You're threatening me. No, Malcolm said. I'm giving you a choice. Sterling's shoulders sagged. You're going to destroy him. Malcolm didn't blink. Reed destroyed himself. Dana let out a breath she'd been holding for months. Maybe years. At last, finally, Sterling lowered himself back into his chair. Fine, he whispered. Reed Marshall is terminated immediately. No severance. He signed the termination order. Cormark will issue public apologies. Signed. We'll cooperate with investigations. Signed. A 7-figure payout will be arranged. Signed. With 4 strokes of a pen, Reed's life collapsed. Jerome leaned back. Pleasure doing business. Dana closed her eyes, relief washing over her in a silent wave. Malcolm gathered the documents calmly, professionally, without triumph, but with finality. Sterling could only manage one more question. What happens to him now? Malcolm paused at the door, his voice low and controlled. He loses everything. He didn't add more. He didn't need to, because Reed Marshall's career, reputation, income, even his name, died on that table. Chapter 8. Aftermath of Ruin. Reed Marshall lasted precisely 47 hours after the corporate reckoning before his entire world caved in. The morning after his termination, the story leaked, quietly, subtly, but with the deadly precision of a scalpel. A whisper among business circles, a forwarded email between HR departments, a private forum thread for corporate counsel. Not a loud scandal, just lethal gossip. The kind that employers fear more than headlines. By the end of the week, Reed's face and name were synonymous with unhirable liability. And that was before the victims stepped forward at Cormark's urging. Dana stood in her kitchen, shaking slightly as she held the custody papers. Her lawyer, one recommended by Malcolm, sat across from her, flipping pages with clinical calm. You have everything you need, the lawyer said. Full custody is very likely, especially with this new public documentation. This actually protects my kids. Dana asked. It protects them from him. No judge will overlook this pattern. Dana didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased, just barely. A woman who had lived in fear for years now felt a doorway open. She signed. Across Chicago, Malcolm Briggs was sorting through new client files in his pristine office. He was leaner now, sharper. His desk was organized, the windows glowed with the sunrise, and the phone kept buzzing with people asking to schedule consultations. Not because he was free, because his name had become synonymous with justice. Real justice. Jerome entered without knocking, holding 2 coffees. I figured you'd be here before sunrise. Couldn't sleep, Malcolm said. Jerome smirked. You slept before all this? Less than I pretended. They clinked coffee cups. Jerome dropped a thick file on the desk. Update on Reed. Malcolm opened it without hesitation. Inside, a report from a private investigator, notes from Dana's lawyer, a few screenshots of job rejections, and finally, a grainy photo of Reed wearing a cheap polo, standing under appealing PRE-owned auto special sign at a dealership in rural Missouri. Used cars, Jerome said. He's got commission-based pay only. No base salary. Malcolm stared at the photo for a long moment. He'll hate it, he said quietly. That was the idea, wasn't it? No, Malcolm corrected, his voice calm but edged in steel. The idea was accountability. Whatever he hates about his new life, that's on him. Jerome nodded. Fair enough. Dana's custody hearing went exactly as predicted. Reed didn't fight. He didn't even show up. His lawyer, some small-town attorney who looked exhausted by the case, simply said, My client withdraws all objection. and walked out. Dana walked out with custody papers and full control of her children's future. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to truly breathe. Later that same month, she sat across from Malcolm at a quiet downtown cafe. "You didn't have to help me this much," she said. "No," Malcolm replied, "but I wanted to." "Then let me say this properly." Her voice steadied. "You saved me. You saved my kids. I was drowning, and you reached in and pulled us out." Malcolm didn't flinch from her gratitude. He simply nodded. "Then don't waste the freedom." "I'm going to law school," Dana blurted out before she lost her nerve. Malcolm's eyebrows lifted, the first sign of surprise he'd shown in weeks. "Law school? I've thought about it for years. I know I'm older than the average student, and it'll be hell balancing everything, but I want to do what you do. I want to fight for people who are trapped with men like Reed." Malcolm stared at her, then a faint smile ghosted across his lips. "Dana, I think you'll be terrifying in a courtroom." She grinned for the first time in their entire acquaintance. "Good," she said. "I'd like that." Talia Briggs did not fall dramatically. She didn't scream or fight or try to manipulate the narrative. She simply vanished from Malcolm's orbit. The prenup was airtight, crafted by Malcolm himself, years ago, when love had made him feel almost guilty for suggesting it. Back then, Talia had laughed and told him, "I won't need it. I'm not here for your money." Now, she left with whatever clothes she could fit in 2 suitcases, a few thousand in her checking account, and the car she already owned. She attempted no negotiations. She offered no apologies. She sent Malcolm a single text 2 weeks later. "I'm sorry. Not that it matters now." He didn't respond. Rumor eventually placed her in California, living with a cousin in a cramped apartment, working sporadic temp jobs, trying and failing to restart her life. But to Malcolm, she was simply gone. Not dead, not despised, just irrelevant. A chapter closed. Meanwhile, Malcolm was reinventing himself. Clients now came to him specifically for work involving corporate abuse, sexual harassment, workplace retaliation, and whistleblower protection. Cases he used to avoid, too messy, too emotional, now held purpose. One afternoon, he sat alone in his office, reviewing paperwork for a new client. A single mother fired after reporting misconduct. He read her statement slowly, meticulously, taking in every nuance, every detail. When he finished, he whispered to himself, "No one like Reed gets to hide in this city anymore." There was conviction in his voice, not anger, not revenge. Conviction. The kind of man earns after losing everything and surviving anyway. Months later, the next turning point came subtly. Jerome poked his head into Malcolm's office. "Someone here to see you." Malcolm rubbed his eyes, expecting another client. Instead, Dana walked in, wearing a navy blue suit, carrying a stack of case files, her presence sharper and more confident than he'd ever seen. "I passed the bar," she said, unable to contain the pride in her voice. "And I want to join your firm, if you'll have me." Malcolm stood, stunned for half a second. Then he extended his hand. "Welcome to Briggs & Carter," he said, voice steady. Her smile was answer enough. And so the aftermath settled into its final form. Reed Marshall, once a rising corporate star, now spent his days negotiating interest rates on decade-old sedans while dodging angry customers. Dana rose, rebuilt, learned, fought, and stepped into a new career where she could wield justice instead of begging for it. Talia slipped into obscurity, her life drained of glamour, stripped of privilege, no longer tethered to the luxury Malcolm once provided. And Malcolm? He rebuilt himself from the ground up. He sharpened his practice, honed his mission, and transformed his rage into purpose. Every case he took, every victim he defended, every abusive system he dismantled, it all chiseled him into a man with clarity instead of pain. His life had become sharper, cleaner, more meaningful. Chapter 9, 3 years later. Peace found in Santorini. The ferry sliced through the Aegean Sea with a soft, rhythmic roar. The morning sun reflected off the water, scattering 1,000 tiny diamonds across the waves. Malcolm Briggs leaned against the railing, arms crossed, eyes on the horizon. The wind tugged at his hair and jacket, but he welcomed it. He had come far, both in miles and in life. Santorini, the same island he had once planned to reveal to Talia. The same whitewashed cliffs and blue-domed churches he had imagined sharing with her under a sky streaked with pink and gold. Now he had it all to himself. And strangely, that made the moment better, not lonelier. No betrayal. No betrayal's echo. Just clarity. The villa they had booked for the anniversary, then only a symbol of his love for her, was now his personal retreat. Marble floors gleamed beneath his polished shoes. The air smelled faintly of the sea, mingling with citrus trees in the courtyard. Malcolm poured himself a glass of wine from the bottle waiting on the kitchen counter, the cork's pop sounding far less ceremonial than it would have been 3 years ago. He settled into a chair, overlooking the cliffs, letting the sun warm his shoulders. Finally, he whispered to himself, a proper moment. He thought of Jerome back home, still running the firm in Chicago. Jerome had insisted Malcolm take this trip, partly as a reward, partly as a way to cleanse himself. Malcolm had resisted at first, thinking he didn't deserve anything peaceful. But over the past months, he had learned that peace wasn't something to earn, it was something to choose. He took a slow sip, savoring the dry, crisp taste. His gaze drifted over the horizon, white buildings clinging to cliffs like confident birds, the wind carrying faint church bells and laughter from nearby cafes. Everything felt stable, predictable, comfortable in a way that he hadn't known for years. His phone buzzed, vibrating against the stone table. Malcolm had deliberately left it in the sun so he could see the number and decide whether to answer. The screen displayed Jerome's name. He answered, "Briggs." "Mal," Jerome said, voice unusually hesitant, almost strained. "I need to tell you something about Talia." Malcolm sat up straighter, but said nothing, waiting. She's terminal. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She wants to see you. She says she wants to apologize, maybe reconcile." Jerome's words fell into the warm, salty air, but Malcolm felt no tremor, no pull in his chest. Only distance. "Why are you telling me this?" Malcolm asked, his tone neutral, almost clinical. "Because I didn't know if you'd want to know. I thought you might need a choice." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, letting the sun warm his face as he exhaled. He remembered the past 3 years. The divorce finalized, Talia gone, Reed destroyed, his firm rebuilt, Dana thriving. He remembered the nights spent arguing with himself over rage, justice, and closure. He remembered feeling the absence of love, of hatred, of longing. He remembered learning to care only for what could be changed, and Talia, now, could not be changed. "I have made my choice," he said finally, voice steady, without heat or remorse. "Decline. Tell her I cannot see her." Jerome hesitated. "Mal, are you sure? She's dying." "This is I'm sure," Malcolm interrupted. "There's nothing left between us that matters. I am not her judge, nor her savior, nor her audience. She doesn't own a place in my life anymore." "All right," Jerome said, though his voice betrayed a tinge of disappointment, maybe even surprise. "I'll handle it." Malcolm ended the call and placed the phone down on the table. He stared at the horizon again, the water glittering, the cliffs gleaming under the sun. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel grief. He didn't feel relief. He felt clarity. He thought about Talia, not the woman he had loved, not the woman who had betrayed him, not the woman now dying across the country, but as a chapter in a book he had long since finished reading. He had closed the cover, marked the page, and carried the story in his mind without it weighing on him anymore. A seagull swooped past, its shadow skimming the water, and Malcolm smiled faintly. Even the smallest, fleeting things in life seemed sharper now, more vivid, more meaningful. The villa was quiet, save for the distant chatter of tourists and the gentle lapping of waves below. Malcolm poured another glass of wine, this time letting the glass catch the light. He swirled it slowly, observing the deep, rich red. He was aware of every detail. The way the wind lifted a loose strand of hair, the sound of the waves breaking against the cliffs, the smell of the sea mixed with blooming jasmine. Every sensation was sharp and deliberate. This was what peace felt like. 3 years ago, he had been a man suspended between fury and heartbreak, trapped by betrayal, his life tethered to chaos he could not control. Now he was free. Free not because Talia was gone. Free not because Reed had fallen, but because he had allowed himself to let go. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, letting the sunlight warm his shoulders. He thought briefly of Dana, now his colleague, thriving and relentless in her pursuit of justice. He thought of Jerome, his unflinching partner, always ready with counsel and loyalty. He thought of the cases he was now pursuing. Corporate predators, corrupt executives, men and women abusing power. Each case a mirror of the past, each victory a reaffirmation of the man he had become. And then he thought again of Talia, not with pain, not with regret, not even with curiosity, just distance, a recognition that her chapter belonged to the past, that she had no claim on him now. Malcolm took another sip of wine, letting it roll over his tongue, bitter and precise. He set the glass down and looked at the horizon one last time. The wind tugged at his jacket. The sun warmed his skin. The water glimmered like scattered jewels. Everything was in its place. Every consequence had been met. Every choice weighed and accounted for. He felt nothing for Talia, no love, no anger, no longing, no resentment. Only the quiet understanding that life was still moving, and he was moving with it. And that was enough. Malcolm picked up the wine glass again, raised it in a small, private toast to the horizon, and whispered to no one but himself. To the life I've built, to the man I've become. And there, in the sun-drenched cliffs of Santorini, with the sea stretching endlessly before him, Malcolm Briggs finally allowed himself to feel peace. He did not call her. He did not change his mind. He let the past lie where it belonged. Chapter 10, True Closure. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting molten gold across the Aegean Sea. The wind carried the faint scent of salt, the tang of citrus groves from below, and the distant chatter of tourists winding down their days. Malcolm Briggs stood on the balcony of the Santorini villa, hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes tracing the endless horizon. He had come a long way, not just in miles but in life. 3 years of measured planning, careful patience, and relentless pursuit of justice had led him here. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage, they had all been steps, brutal yet necessary, shaping the man who now breathed in the Mediterranean air with a calm he had never known before. Malcolm's gaze drifted downward to the whitewashed streets below, the narrow alleys and stairways winding like veins through the cliffside villages. Children laughed as they chased stray cats, shopkeepers waved to tourists, and boats rocked gently in the harbor. Life went on, indifferent, beautiful, chaotic in its own rhythm. He thought of Talia, not with longing, not with anger, not with regret, merely recognition. A name, a memory, a chapter that had closed. She had tried to claim a piece of him with her lies, her infidelity, her manipulations, but she had failed. And Malcolm didn't care anymore. That realization was the moment true closure began. Not the confrontation, not the destruction of Reed, not even the satisfaction of watching justice take its course. Closure had come quietly, almost invisibly, the second he stopped giving them power over his emotions. He breathed deeply. The air was warm against his skin, carrying hints of rosemary and lavender from the gardens below. The wind tugged at his jacket, lifting a loose strand of hair across his forehead. He brushed it aside and smiled faintly. Dana's face flickered in his mind. He smiled a little wider. Not for nostalgia, not for pity, but for admiration. She had reclaimed her life with sharpness and courage. She had been brave when Reed had tried to manipulate, when the system had tried to bury him. And she had chosen to keep moving forward like he had. Malcolm's phone buzzed on the small table beside him. He glanced at it. Jerome, probably checking in. He didn't answer. Not yet. Today was not about strategy or clients or legal battles. Today was about stillness. He poured a glass of the local wine, deep ruby red, and held it up to the sunlight. The liquid caught the light and scattered it like sparks. He thought about the toast he had imagined so many years ago, the one that would have been shared with Talia in naive bliss. Now, he raised the glass alone. To the life I've rebuilt, he whispered softly. To the peace I've earned. To the man I've become. The clink of glass against railing, or perhaps just the sound of his own resolve, echoed faintly. He tilted his head back, letting the sunlight warm his face, letting the wind brush across his skin. It felt different now. Not empty, not hollow, complete. Malcolm allowed himself to remember the darkest nights. The cellar-like jail cell where adrenaline had been replaced by clarity. The moments he had held a gun with steady hands, knowing he could strike yet choosing restraint. The legal battles, the evidence, the confrontations, the strategic dismantling of Reed Marshall's carefully constructed life. He remembered the months of reconstruction, rebuilding his firm, finding meaning in purpose, watching Dana rise, watching Talia vanish into irrelevance. And yet, none of those memories carried power anymore. They were lessons, milestones, markers on the path, but they did not define him. Not anymore. He closed his eyes and thought of Reed one last time. The man who had once flaunted deceit as if it were a crown, now reduced to selling used cars in some obscure Midwestern town. Malcolm felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not cruelty, not glee. Only understanding. Consequences had arrived naturally, and the world had corrected itself. He did not need to gloat. He did not need revenge. He only needed to continue forward. Opening his eyes, he watched the horizon blur as the sun sank further, painting the sky with bruised purples and deep oranges. He let the colors settle over him, soaking in the vastness of the sea, the permanence of the cliffs, the eternal rhythm of waves hitting rock. It reminded him that life was cyclical, that endings were necessary for beginnings. And he was ready to begin again. He took another slow sip of wine, savoring the dry bitterness, letting it ground him in the moment. The sound of the sea below merged with the faint laughter of locals in the streets, the soft calls of vendors, and the fluttering of laundry hanging in the wind. Every sound felt vivid, present, alive. Malcolm remembered a phrase he had once read in a book. Closure is not found in what happens to others. It is found in how you no longer allow them to control your heart. He smiled, almost imperceptibly. He had understood this fully now. Talia, Reed, betrayal, humiliation, rage, they had all been powerless the moment he stopped letting them matter. And that freedom, the pure, unshakable freedom, was the greatest gift he had ever received. He looked down at the villa's courtyard, where a small table held fresh flowers and a plate of fruit. The island was alive with ordinary, everyday beauty. And for the first time in years, Malcolm felt fully present in a world that had once felt treacherous and uncertain. He imagined walking forward from this moment, not back, not sideways, but straight ahead. No lingering shadows, no unfinished business, no ghosts in his mind. Just the next step, and the step after that, and the next. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the papers left on the small balcony table. Malcolm gathered them, stacked them neatly, and set them aside. His mind wandered briefly to Dana and Jerome, to clients who now relied on him for guidance, to the cases he had yet to take on. Life, in all its complexity and unpredictability, awaited. He raised his glass one final time to the sea, to the cliffs, to the sky, to himself. To the future, he whispered quietly, with no lingering bitterness or hope for the past. To what comes next? The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with fire and shadow. Malcolm Briggs exhaled, a deep, steady breath, letting the warmth of the day and the vastness of the ocean fill him completely. No anger, no longing, no regret, only peace, only clarity, only freedom. He set the glass down on the railing, straightened, and stepped back, feeling the cool stone under his feet, the wind brushing his face. The world stretched before him, vast, uncharted, and full of possibility. He had survived betrayal. He had rebuilt his life. He had enacted justice. And now he was finally free. Malcolm took one last look at the horizon, then turned slowly, letting the balcony doors close softly behind him. The past no longer had a claim on him. The future awaited.